That and the other comments we've played you might make it sound as if the CAS review pretty much settles the debate on gender identity care. But the report and its recommendations are highly controversial, including among many trans people. Earlier today, I spoke to the sociologist and co-director of the Feminist Gender Equality Network, Natacha Kennedy.
The CAS review ignored most of the evidence that's available. It said, we're only going to choose high quality evidence at the highest level. And that is always a randomized control trial, blind trial. I was involved in one of those when I was a volunteer tester for one of the vaccines. Yeah, I wasn't told which vaccine I was given. You can do it with things like that, but you can't have a randomized control trial for gender reassignment surgery, because people will know if they've been given hormones or haven't been given hormones. And it's also quite unethical to do that, to say, well, we might give you hormones and we might not, and you won't know until you start puberty or something like that. It's unethical. They excluded everything except one, I think it was one randomized control. That has basically resulted in almost no evidence for existing treatments. What they've proposed for new treatments, they have provided, as far as I can see, no evidence for that. Certainly no randomized control trials, no observation trials, nothing. And when you think about it, 90% of medicine, I think, is based on observational trials, not randomized control trials. They are asking for a much higher standard of evidence to support what is actually going on, and then they are dismissing most of that evidence. But what they're proposing is not based on any evidence at all, from what I can see, not even observational evidence, maybe in some cases observational evidence, but nothing major, certainly nothing of the level which they are demanding and dissing for other treatments. It's going to be taking away access to healthcare. It's trying to block children from socially transitioning in school and places like that until they've seen a doctor about it. Who else needs to have a doctor's permission to get a haircut, wear different clothes and change their name? It's literally a human rights issue for children. If you take out things like social transitioning, you are also taking out that affirmation. Being affirmed as to who you are, taking that away is hugely psychologically problematic for a lot of people.
That was Natacha Kennedy speaking to me earlier today. And I'm now joined live by Dr Aidan Kelly, a clinical psychologist and a clinical director at Gender Plus. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. What's your verdict on the CAS review?
I guess on first viewing, it looks like sensible stuff. You want better healthcare, more evidence, more accessible care, less lists, holistic care, being able to get your needs met. I think the question I have in my mind, the question of what I'm left with is, how is any of this going to be implemented? It's taken kind of 3.5 years since when the CAS report review was first commissioned in September 2020 to get to this point. Most of what's been said on the face of it kind of sounds like common sense. However, what do you do and how are we going to put this in place? We can't wait another 3.5 years for that to happen. There's lots of really distressed young people that need support and sadly are kind of seeking that in unsafe, unregulated, unregistered places at the moment.
Yes, I suppose, some people are saying it seems like common sense, people from all sides of the perspective. I know Stonewall actually put out sort of a commentary that sort of said, they were a bit more open to the report's findings than some people had expected. I think that's maybe because people are interpreting what's been said in somewhat different ways. I know you used to work at the Gender Identity Development Service, so GIDS, and the report is 388 pages long. I'm not going to pretend I've read it all today, but lots of the commentary surrounding the report and the interviews which have been given are suggesting that GIDS was not open-minded enough about the people who were presenting to them. So there's sort of the idea that care needs to be more holistic. Implicit in that is the idea that it wasn't holistic enough before. And if someone was presenting with gender dysphoria, but also a lot of other issues, when they presented to GIDS, they just say, okay, well, are you trans or are you not? They wouldn't say, well, let's talk about the potential autism. Let's talk about other pressures you might be under. Is that a sort of evaluation of GIDS that you recognise as someone that used to work there?
I think what's important to understand is that GIDS was commissioned by NHS England and given a contract, a set of protocols within which it had to function and operate. It couldn't assess for autism. It couldn't deliver other mental health therapies because it was strictly prohibited from doing that. What happened in GIDS when you identified those needs, you had to refer to what often was called CAMS, so the local child and adolescent mental health service in the area that person lived, which sadly could mean that that young person might then go on the back of another really long waiting list. And so you're trying to support and manage the care of a young person when your hands are kind of tied behind your back and you're not able to actually deliver everything. So I think it's unfair. I think GIDS has become the kind of fall guy in all of this. And I guess I think what we'll see in time is that although GIDS is gone, it closed last month, the problem hasn't gone away. How is this actually going to be delivered? Because this kind of synopsis or version of where things are at in 2024 was there in 2020 when it got commissioned. But in fact, we're now in a far worse position. Wait lists are far longer. So the people coming to the top of the wait list now have been waiting far longer. And we all know that in kind of mental health or issues related to mental health, if you intervene earlier, it's more effective and it's easier. But now you're going to be dealing with people who've been sitting on wait lists for far longer, and there's going to be lots of complexity. So I think the review's all well and good, but I can understand your previous caller and other people's views that it's quite sceptical views. That I fail to kind of hold out the hope that it's going to be the watershed moment that people are kind of positioning it as really.
We must treat children who are questioning their gender with compassion and sensitivity, but we have to recognise that we need to move with extreme caution in these areas because we just simply don't know the long-term impacts of what this all means, and children's wellbeing is uppermost in our mind, and that's why we've acted on the interim findings previously, whether that's the NHS banning the routine use of puberty blockers, or indeed the guidance that we gave to schools about how to treat these issues in those environments, which again were warmly welcomed. I've been very consistent on this topic throughout my career, and I want to make sure that we consider this report carefully, but we've already acted on the interim findings, and I said it's very much in alignment with our way of thinking, which is to exercise extreme caution on these issues because we simply do not know the long-term consequences of impacts.
So Sunak has said the government will consider the report very carefully. Labour, though, have gone one step further and said they'll accept its findings in full. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting posted this on Twitter. Today's report must provide a watershed moment for the NHS's gender identity services. The government must now immediately act, but if they do not, the next Labour government will work to implement the expert recommendations of the CAS review to ensure that young people are receiving appropriate and high-quality care. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper spoke to Sky.
The report is very clear that children and young people have been badly let down and have been receiving treatment that's not based on evidence. So I think the CAS review is really important. We welcome it. Labour accepts all of its recommendations. I think they should be implemented now as swiftly as possible, and we would like to work with the government on doing that.
And what would you like to say to those doctors, clinicians who felt that they couldn't speak out because if they did, they would be victimised?
Well, I hope that this report really is a watershed moment for the NHS, for NHS gender services, because this is, the report's clear, it's basically talking about evidence, focusing on children's welfare, and not having all of this get caught up in culture wars or in different kinds of those debates, instead be able to just put the child at the centre of the support that the NHS should give them.
Now, comments like that and the other comments we've played you might sound as if the CAS review pretty much settles the debate on gender identity care. But the report and its recommendations are highly controversial, including among many trans people. Earlier today, I spoke to the sociologist and co-director of the Feminist Gender Equality Network, Natacha Kennedy.
The CAS review